Because you're worth it. That's the L'Oreal advert I'm sure we've all heard. But do you believe it about yourself? Well, knowing your own value and worth is one of the themes in today's conversation. We are meeting with Kate, who is a Chief Internal Audit Officer in the financial services industry. We're going to learn all about her area of expertise, audit, her career journey, and she's got some great advice to share with us too. We're also going to talk about having the courage to make tough decisions, why choosing a company and culture where you can be yourself is so important, managing imposter syndrome, having the courage to take risks, put yourself forward and get in that arena, and of course, knowing your own value and worth and why it's never a good idea to dim your own light. So if that sounds good to you, fantastic. Kate and I will see you in a moment. Kate, hello, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to do a deep dive into all things audit today. So really looking forward to it.
It might be quite unique in that, so that's nice.
How about you get us started by telling us who you are and what you do and how long you've been doing it for?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kate Ireland. I am the Chief Internal Audit Officer for Yorkshire Building Society. I've been in this role for just shy of a year, and I've worked in internal audit for about 5 years now, and before that I've had a career in what's called external audit. So I've been working in this world for about just under 20 years.
Thank you. All right. Now this is a podcast. So if you're somebody that enjoys podcasts, tell us what you're enjoying right now.
So I was talking about this with my husband, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm probably am more of an audible person. I listen to and read an awful lot of books. The one thing I always listen to is Desert Island Discs. I've listened to that for years and years and years and years. It's just about the right length for me. I do find people fascinating. I'm embarrassed to say I find famous people even more fascinating. And I just love the little excerpts of music. So that suits me very, very well. But on speaking with so many of my colleagues, I realise this is a world that I need to get involved with.
Desert Island Discs is a classic though. So glad you like that one. All right. Kate, there are so many misconceptions about what we do day to day. So I'd love to know what misconceptions there are about audit and what your friends and family who are outside of the industry think you're doing all day.
So you're absolutely right. I think, honestly, my friends maybe have a vague idea of what I do. They know I work in an office, put it that way. My family don't have a clue what I do, nor do they seem to have much of an interest, if I'm honest, which is no bad thing, I think. They do know I work for a building society. That makes more sense to them now than it did when I was in asset management. So that's a step in the right direction. I think the main misconceptions is that we are deeply and uninteresting, dull people who sit in a dark room and do lots and lots of sums. So people tend to be quite surprised that there's an outlook that's a little bit more strategic and is very heavily people focused. I don't think auditors have that reputation. I think normally we're labelled as bean counters, people that just go around writing reports on people that people won't enjoy. So quite negative connotations, I would say, across the board. I think that's the myth I'm hoping I can dispel.
All right. Well, hopefully we can dispel some of those today. Before we get into the audit part, it would be really nice if possible, if you could give us an overview of the retail banking, which includes building societies, I guess, that industry, because I haven't had someone talk about that before.
Yeah, definitely. So I think within retail banking, the nice thing about building societies is, in general, we're quite a nice, simple model. So it's a good way of explaining what we do. So effectively what we do is we lend money to people so that they can buy a house that they couldn't afford with their own money. and that's called a mortgage. And we lend that out at a certain rate that is slightly more than, say, the Bank of England base rate. So we have costs that we have to cover. So obviously we've got our building costs and our salaries, et cetera, et cetera. But with the money that we take in as interest on the mortgages that we've loaned out, we give that back to our savers. So on one side, you have your savers, and so they're people that give us money to look after for them. We give them a level of interest, which is effectively funded by the interest revenue that we get from the mortgages. So we take, say, Jo's money that she's given me in her savings, and we lend it out to Kate so that she can buy a house. And it's quite a beautiful model, because it effectively means that at whatever stage of your life, so when you're trying to get on the property ladder, we are there to support you in getting your first property or trying to get on that ladder. Yeah. And we're funding that from people who've already made their money. They tend to be slightly older, of a different generation. So there's a sense of sort of paying back, which I find quite elegant, and it's quite kind. I think historically, the reason that building societies were sort of set up was they were very regional. So say in Leeds, where we're based, in Leeds, there would be local people that had that model. So there was this sense of they would borrow when they were young, and then as they got older, then they would reap the rewards in their savings. So it was cyclical, it went through their lives. Yeah. Now it's different nowadays. Building societies tend to be national. So it's not that you borrow and you lend to the same building society. It's quite likely that you'll have different elements, and we're throughout the country. So the model has moved, but that basics of lending and borrowing is exactly the same. So we have to make sure that we're lending sustainably, and we're making sure that the people that we're lending to can pay us back when they need to, because it's other people's money that we're lending. And that's kind of where my role comes in, to make sure that all of that money that we are accountable for and looking after is protected. So we don't just give money to anybody. We go through lots and lots of checks to make sure that they can afford the loan that we're giving to them. So it is quite a simple model. Now, the difference with building societies and banks is that we don't make any profit. So with a retail bank, there's an element of profit that will go off to the shareholders. Whereas for us, we're what's called a mutual, which means any money that we get in that we don't have to use in supporting salaries and building costs, et cetera, we pay back to our members. And that's very motivating for me. That means that we're, trying our utmost to make sure that we give back as much as we possibly can. And that's a very motivating thing for me on a personal note.
Yeah, that's amazing, and very different to the perception of the finance industry from those outside of it, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that unfortunately, bankers. It rhymes with a word that's unfortunate for a start off, but it does tend to carry some quite negative connotations. And when you walk around the office that I work in, I work with such a brilliant bunch of people who desperately want to get people in homes, desperately want to get them on the property ladder, and really want to give back a level of savings that they can to those people that have given us their money. And the risk is not there for us. We're not a high risk entity, which means you're not going to get the level of return that you would if you put your money more at risk. But it's safe, and it's supported and it's regulated, and it's fascinating to see what our customers are saving for. They're all in very different periods of their life. Sometimes it's for their children, sometimes it's for their grandchildren, sometimes it's fear of a rainy day. But what we hope to give them is some comfort, that their money is protected, and they will get it back with a level of interest which is fair. That feels good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And so if you had to give us one sentence or a couple of sentences around the purpose of audit and what your customers rely on you for, how would you describe that?
I think effectively what we're there to make sure is we're there to protect. We are there to protect our members' money. And we do that from a lot of different ways, but we effectively sit there and try and think of all the things that could possibly go wrong. So it could be that, I don't know, somebody steals someone else's money. It could be that we run out of money and there's nothing to lend anyone. It could be that operationally something goes wrong and none of our customers can get through and take their money out. It could be that someone doesn't feel protected in the workplace because, I don't know, it could be that they're having problems with, I don't know, job security, or it literally covers anything that can go wrong within the business. And what we think about is how can we make sure that there are what we call controls, so things that will prevent things from going wrong, or if they do go wrong, that they're rectified to prevent harm from happening to anyone else. So whether that's our members, whether it's our customers or our staff or the society itself, that's what we're there to do. We're there to protect. And then the other side is we're there to enhance. So we look at things and we think about how we can make them better. So we look at all the different processes, like the myriad of processes across the whole enterprise, so absolutely everything, and think about how we can make it better, more efficient, more effective, better run, more strategically aligned. So for someone like me who's really nosy, it's fascinating because we get to see everything. We have what's called a sort of unfettered access to absolutely everything that we need to see. And I suppose that the difference with the audit function is that we are aligned, it's called a line of defence. So as I said, we're there to protect and enhance. But we are independent of the business, which means we sit a little bit separate. We're still part of the society, we're still part of the business, but we are allowed to give and able to give an objective view to the board. So the board are accountable for the running of the business, and they delegate that down to the executive, management, and all the staff. But they can't oversee everything in that level of granularity to give them comfort. So we are there to do that for them. So I report directly into the chair of what's called the audit committee. He sits on the board. And so I have a dual reporting line. I report into him and the CEO. And effectively, if something's going wrong, I have an independent stance such that I'm protected, that I can freely give my opinion as to how I think things are going. And that's a massive privilege. And my team that sit under me also have that independence. So it means we're not conflicted. So if we see something that doesn't feel right, there's no sense of, I'm not sure if I should speak up. We're not impeded by any of that because of this level of independence. And a lot of the time, what we look at, we say that looks great. And other times we look at it and we think, actually, there's some enhancements you could make to make it better. And other times we look at it and we think, this is quite risky. You actually need to change how you're doing stuff. So it depends on what we're looking at. And what we end up recommending. But it's I think it's that ability to see across the whole business that's such a privilege in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So if we were to zoom in on an average day or week in your working life, Kate, what would we find you doing?
Well, so it's much more people focused than I think people would expect. And it was quite funny over COVID because I remember my then 8-year-old just came in and she said, all you do is sit and talk to people. And I said, yeah, that kind of is all I do. So I do a lot of talking and I do an awful lot of listening. And audit literally is from audit. It means to hear. It means to listen. And that is our job. We listen to people and we make recommendations. But at a more granular level, so I attend a lot of meetings. So I sit on the executive. So I'm a member of our ExCo. So I have that team. So that's with the CEO and the CRO. So all the other chiefs, it's like 7 of us, and we effectively run the business. Then I report into the board directly through the chair of the audit committee. So that's another team I kind of report into. And then I have my own team. So I'd say in a normal week, it starts off with me meeting with my PA, because without her, I would fall to pieces. So she helped me balance everything I'm trying to do. Then I will have a number of meetings with my team. So they will let me know how they're getting on with various things. So audits tend to take, each of them are like a mini project, and they're all about 3 months long. And you'll have a number of those on at any one time. So I will look at their work and I'll see what I think needs enhancing or doesn't. So there's an element of me reviewing people's work. There's a lot of me meeting with different people to understand what is going on in the business, to understand their risks, to understand what's important to them. And then I need to obviously communicate that to my team so I can educate them. Huge part of my role is leadership. So I don't, I suppose, really do any actual work. I lead through my team. So they're the ones that do all the important stuff. And I'm there to enable them, I suppose. I'm there to remove blockers. I'm there to help them with their development. But ultimately, I am accountable. So when things go wrong, then I step in, and that is my job to protect them. So much of it is leading through other people, which the higher up I get in my career, the more I get that opportunity, and I love that. And that's not dissimilar to other roles on the executive. I think the higher up you get, the more that you have of that, you stop being the expert and you start leading through others, which is an absolute joy. But if I think about today, for example, what did I start with today? Oh, so today I had we had a training session from the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. So they very kindly, we had their head of professional practices came in to talk to my team. So we had a team meeting where they came and presented about global risks. Then I had a meeting with the deputy chair of the board about a very specific area she was concerned about, and I gave her my opinion and some advice. Then I went into a massive risk committee that was 4 hours long. And whilst that was going on, I had a few papers that I needed to issue to a remuneration committee. And now I'm talking to you. So, I mean, it's so hard to say what a normal day is, because honestly, they're so varied, but inevitably they involve some sort of development, lots and lots of people, lots of listening and lots of asking questions. And that's kind of it, to be honest. And reviewing reports, I guess. That's a big part as well.
Thank you. You mentioned there that you're leading the audit function. And I think sometimes when we think of functions, we don't realise the component parts that sit within a function. So in HR, for example, there's lots of different streams of work. Would that be true of audit too? And if so, can you kind of share what a department might look like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really depends on what your... so audit departments will look really different depending on what the type of risks are that the company that you're working for has. Trying to put that succinctly, and I'm not sure I did. But for us, we have different types of risk within a financial service firm, and in banking, you tend to separate it into these risks that are called prudential. So that's your capital and liquidity. I don't know how to explain that very well, but it's very financial. And then you have conduct. So that is, how are you behaving? How are you actually looking after your customers? Doing the right thing? You're doing what you should be doing, not what you could be doing. And then you've got operational risk. So that is your building safe? Does the plumbing work? Does the cash flow easily? Can people access their money? Do the lights stay on? So operational risks are probably the more tangible, because you have those in every business, irrespective of what you actually do for a living. So my team separate into those different types of risk, and then underneath that you have a lot of people supporting. But in addition to that, you've then got an IT audit function, which is slightly different. So everything we do nowadays is supported by some sort of IT tech. I don't think it matters what business you're in, you're going to have some IT. So there's an IT element of everything that we do. I have a data specialist. So data is becoming quite a hot topic within auditing, as it should. So I have a sort of data specialist and a team that I'm building out there. And then I have a professional practice head who effectively audits me and my team. So make sure that we are doing our work to the right quality, so that the board comfortable that what we're telling them is good enough. So we go and audit everyone else, and they audit us. So that's sort of an internal support. It's very good for me because it helps me know that my team is meeting standards, if you will. But also they make sure that we're trained properly, that we're keeping up to speed with our peers in terms of what good looks like. So they have quite an up and out focus. So I suppose it's like quality assurance, if you will. That's what they do. But I'd say that's pretty standard for a financial services type, a banking type firm. But they can be structured differently. So you can have pools of generalists, as we call them, so they can do a bit of everything. Personally, I think it's wonderful to have a go at all of it. I mean, this is a very personal opinion, and not specialise too quickly. I think you can specialise quickly and you will climb very, very quickly. But the great thing about our world is that you can see across everything. So you can actually try stuff before you have to settle. And that to me is a really good thing in a career. So I think that ability to be able to move through. And I think we are looking structurally at actually, should everyone have a little bit of IT acumen, and should everyone be able to do a bit of data? So more of an agile mindset in terms of what people are able to do. And that's a bit of a step away from previous models where everything was very defined. I prefer that. I think everyone should have an awareness of how everything fits together. I think that's about it.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I'm really curious about the key differences between internal audit versus external audit. And I guess my perception is that a smaller company might outsource audit to another company, which is why you'd have an external auditor come in. But can you shed some light on that for us, please?
Yeah, of course. So really small companies don't need an audit at all, is the good news for small companies. And then when you get to a certain size, your financial statements or your accounts, so what the accountants do, they have to be audited, and that is an external auditor. So within our world, this concept of independence is hugely important, because if you're reading those accounts and you're taking information from them, you want to know that, to put it simply, they're unbiased. You want to know that they're true and they're factually accurate. Yeah. And it's not to say that absolutely every accountant is going to try and misrepresent the truth. You shouldn't need auditors, is the honest truth. In a wonderful world, we would need to exist. But actually, sometimes by virtue of just having us, it means that people just are more incentivized to just tell it exactly how it is, rather than trying to paint a rosy picture. And whether or not that happens or not, it gives people comfort that they know that someone external has looked at this information without any bias at all, has said, that's accurate, that's complete. I mean, there's lots of things about how accurate it is. It's within the confines of materiality is another point. But I think the concept we look for is true and fair. That's what we're trying to say. So external audit very much focus on the financial statements or the accounts. Now, you also get auditors that are consultants, and they will come in externally to a business. And quite often it's the big four, so people like PwC or EY, Deloitte, KPMG, and they will come in and give some advice, or they might look at something and suggest some improvements. But again, they're an external company that comes in and provides that. And to your point about smaller functions, you're absolutely right. So a small firm may decide that so internal audit is not mandatory. You don't have to have a function until you hit a certain size or you're regulated in some way. So not every firm has to have an internal audit function. But for those smaller ones that do, they quite often, as you said, outsource or co-source to an external firm, because there's just no point in having your own function. You're not big enough. Just as you would with HR, you might outsource payroll or something. It's exactly the same decision. Now, where you do have an internal audit function like mine, I've moved across. I was in external audit, and then 5 years ago, I moved over into what we call it industry. So I moved into industry, which means I sat within a business. And that the big change there is that you have to sit with the people that you're issuing reports on. So when you're in external audit, you go, you do your work and you leave. So if you're having those very difficult conversations where you're saying, I don't agree with you on this, or I think you should make improvements here, you have that line of separation and that line of credibility, because you have a big brand behind you. You have, a name that everyone trusts, like PwC, and it's a stamp. And the board tend to say, great, I trust this. They've got that brand. But you go again, and you may come back the next year, but you still have that separation. Whereas an internal audit, those people that you're giving the opinion to, you got to live with them. They don't go anywhere. Yeah. You're still on the floor with them the next day. So I'd say an internal audit, one of the big differences is that you have got to build that trust. Now, you have to build trust in an external audit because there's a sales element to it as well. So it is all still about people, but internally you can't go burning your bridges. You can't. Yeah. You can't. If you're going to have, and you have to have difficult conversations on a daily basis, you have to be in a position of trust such that people are willing to listen to you. But where it is difficult is that you have to have the emotional intelligence to do it in a way that means they'll let you come back and they will keep listening to you. And it's really hard. And sometimes, I mean, last week I was auditing everyone's bonus, for example, and I was checking whether or not they'd hit their targets. That isn't going to make them very popular if I'm going to say they haven't. And that's really tricky. But for me, it's all about how you do it. So your integrity is absolutely critical to this role. You can't misrepresent what you find. You can't hide what you find. You can't sort of, I don't know, you obviously you can't not tell the truth, but you can do it in a way that doesn't harm people. You can do it with good intentions, and you can do it because I am here for the members and to protect them. Yeah. And I think that's what you have to hold closely to you. But I'd say that is one of the biggest differences, is that you basically have to live. You're going around sometimes telling people that their babies are ugly, and then the next day you have to carry on working with them. It can be really tricky. So the ability to be kind is so important in my job. That's probably another myth that I would try and dispel.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you very much. So, Kate, if we zoom out a little bit, what might we find you doing less frequently throughout the year that it's important for the audience to be aware of?
So, what do we do less frequently? So I suppose the thing I haven't really touched on is the board interaction. So I, on a quarterly basis, will go directly to the board and give them a summary of all the work that my team have been doing. And I will go to them to let them know how I think the risk and control environment is functioning. So that's probably one of the bigger things that we focus on. And for us, you do all of this work on a daily basis, which culminates in a sort of 3-monthly report, which then culminates in a quarterly presentation to the board. And I feel such a responsibility at that point, because that's all of my team's work for a whole quarter, all in a sort of half-hour update. And so that's the big moment. And I suppose it's a bit like I've always thought this, but when somebody goes to the Olympics and they train and they train and they train, and then I don't know, they're on the balance beam and they fall off, and you just think, oh my goodness. It's a bit like that. It's sort of, that's the bit that you don't really want to get that wrong. Because you only get 4 chances a year, and if you so I suppose there are less frequent things that we do like that. Another one is like the annual account. So quite a lot of it is relatively cyclical. But I think they're the slightly extraordinary things. I mean, for me, I'm heavily involved with our DE&I efforts, so I'm the executive sponsor of that. So that gives me a completely different view of the enterprise and the business, and I find it incredibly motivating. So I think within our society, they've given me the opportunity to do something that I'm very passionate about, which supports the business, but actually has nothing to do with my day job. So that's brilliant. That I think it's great that they give us that opportunity. And they do,
Yeah.
other people sit on other boards, so others of the exec, they're what's called independent non-executives of charities. So they will be given volunteer days such that they can support other things outside of
Yeah.
a building society. So there's quite a lot of other things that we do. So
Yeah.
it is so varied, I
Yeah.
have to say.
Mm.
It's hard to explain. I'm probably not doing a great job of explaining what we do.
No, you are doing a great job. One thing I was curious about was the interaction with the regulators and how that happens.
Yeah, so the regulators, they take quite a risk-based approach. So, I mean, they will talk to trying not to be too jargony, the CFO, so the Chief Financial Officer, and say the Chief Risk Officer and the Director of Compliance a lot more than they would speak to me. So I speak with them at least every year. So first of all, they have to approve me for my role. So I have to write an application form that says basically that I'm competent, I know what I'm doing, I've got a history in this world. And so they have to approve me in my role. So that's probably step one with the regulator. And if they reject me, I'm not allowed to do my job. So, I mean, normally speaking, they would send me on a training course or something, and hopefully I get approved eventually. But they can reject you, and I have in the past, but thankfully they didn't reject me. And so the PRA is part of who we're regulated by, and the FCA, but it's the PRA that meet with me more regularly. So I've met with them twice since I've been in this role. One was a sort of first impressions. I think when you're new anywhere, people always want to know what your first impressions are, because it's before you get clouded by what seems normal.
Yeah.
You learn a lot from that. And then, once a year, they sort of want an update from me in terms of my impressions of the risk environment. So it's a very important relationship for us, because without regulatory approval, we cannot exist. We are not allowed to do what we do without the permission to do it. But also I have a responsibility to tell the truth. So I have to build a relationship with the PRA such that they trust me, that I am telling them what they don't need to worry about as much as what they do. But if I'm not credible, or if I don't show the right levels of integrity, effectively they will come and bother us a lot more. So if they don't feel they can trust my function to tell them the truth, they will send their own people in to do their own investigative work. So last year, they asked my team to do a big review on their behalf. So we did about 5 months of work, which went directly to them. So we're kind of marking our friends' homework, if you will. We're looking internally at something, and then that goes directly to the regulator. And they want to know that we've pushed enough and we've interrogated enough so that they don't have to. And the good thing was they were satisfied. We had a meeting subsequently to talk through the results, and they were comfortable that we were credible enough to do the work, and as a business, we were doing what they were hoping we were doing. So it's probably, in terms of my stakeholders, one of the most critical on a personal and business point of view. It is quite scary, I won't lie. I think just because of the power that they wield, I suppose. But it is, I guess it's good to be kept in check. I mean, I think sometimes you find out so much about yourself from when people ask you questions. When you actually have to explain yourself, you realise what you do and you don't know. So it's no bad thing, but it can be a bit frightening. But compliance, they will have an interaction with them probably weekly.
Wow.
If we were a more risky enterprise, that they will see you all the time. So it really depends on the level of risk. But we're not up the scale in terms of risk. We're not investment bankers. We're not a hedge fund who do some crazy accounting or anything. They let us be a little bit.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Kate, what do you love most about your role?
Now, it's an interesting one. So I think there's a number of things that really, really appeal to me. So I love leading teams. I always have. And that's not unique to the role that I'm in. It's unique to probably the seniority I'm in, or have got to. But leading through others is just an absolute privilege. I love it. I love seeing people develop. There's nothing I like more than hearing about people that used to work for me and seeing how they're doing now, wherever they've moved to, and staying in touch and just seeing their careers blossom. It's just an absolute joy for me. So leadership is an absolute privilege that I love. I love my team meetings. I love getting them excited about things. I love setting a vision with them and then enacting on it and seeing it play out. And that for me is an absolute joy. I think I am naturally someone who likes to take command. I like an element of control. I don't think that's something I used to like admitting, but it is absolutely there. So being a decision maker for me is huge.
Yeah.
I was probably not the best. You'd have to ask some of my old bosses, but I'm not great at being told what to do. So the more senior I've got and the more I have a seat at the table, the happier I am. I quite enjoy accountability and responsibility. I think some people hate it. I thrive on it. I like knowing that I'm doing the right thing and checking myself on that and taking ownership. So I think that the leadership side is a huge thing for me. And then from an audit perspective, it's definitely being able to see the whole enterprise from end to end. That is just so much fun. I mean, as I think I've tried to allude to, every day is different, but everything I look at is different. Now, it's difficult because I'm not going to be an expert in every single area of the business. Like, one cannot be an expert in everything.
Yeah.
So you have to get used in my role to not being the cleverest person in the room, but you are the best auditor. So the role that you're doing, you are the best at, but you will always be working with people that are better than you in their roles, because of course they are, that's their living. So there's a humility that comes with it. So we're there to ask questions to make them better. So you don't get the attention, you don't get the, oh, look what they've launched, look what it's not a job, I would say, for people that like praise or people that like to please others. It's not that job, but you get this satisfaction from knowing that you have helped your members and you have helped the business achieve its objectives. And that is in all areas of the business. So the variety is just formidable. And the learning. So constantly I have to be aware of what are our peers up to, what regulations are coming down the pipeline, what's Elon Musk doing, what's going on in Russia. Like absolutely everything impacts everything, and it all intertwines. And so it is, for someone who wants to learn, which I do, learning is a big thing for me. It's just a joy to every day I'm learning, and I will never get to the point where I know everything. And again, that's probably another thing that you have to be comfortable with. But yeah, for me, it ticks all of those boxes. So yeah, lots that I enjoy.
Brilliant. Thank you. What's the most challenging aspect of the role?
It's definitely the delivering hard messages. And you're almost doing that daily. And I think in my experience, people don't do things wrong because they're trying to defraud, or they're culturally inept, or they're bad people. People do things wrong because they're being pushed, or they haven't been trained properly, or they haven't had the time, or they've just got something wrong because they're humans. And when you have to deliver a message which is, I'm afraid you got that wrong that day, with all the will in the world, that can be really hard to deliver. And sometimes you just, seeing people's reactions, seeing that you've just made their day a bit worse, sometimes it just gets a bit tough. And you focus on the big picture and you know that you're there to support them and to make things better. But there are times when I think, oh God, it would be just so nice to just go around telling people happy thoughts. And you can't always do that. And sometimes that's part of the role. It's very balanced. But I think delivering difficult messages, it's almost like every day I'm giving feedback. So with a normal leadership role, you'll have your one-to-ones and you you give feedback maybe, I don't know, once a week or however that looks. We're basically doing that daily. So you get very good at it, of course you do, but it sometimes it can just be a bit tiring, and sometimes you sort of you just sort of want a break. You just want to go, today I just want it to be easy. And you never know how it's going to be. So sometimes you think something's really small, and so you deliver it in a sort of almost nonchalant way, and suddenly you realise you really offended someone and you never meant to. And so judging their reactions can be quite tight. So it's the emotional side of it, I think, the having to constantly be on your A game from an EQ point of view. That can be draining, but the other side of it is it's also thrilling, because you're dealing with people, and so it's two sides of the same coin. But that's the more challenging. I think the worst experience for me has definitely been where we found something where people actually were so frightened of us coming in that they falsified information. And that meant that we had to report a much worse issue, which was them falsifying things, than if they just told the truth, because it wouldn't have been a big issue. It would have been nothing. But instead, because they were frightened of us coming in, we ended up having to write a report to say they falsified information. And that is so upsetting, because obviously we hadn't done a good enough job of setting expectations of what our work would look like. And so there were learnings for us. But that fear that you see on people's faces when we come, like if you say to someone, I'm going to audit you, you don't get a great reaction back. Sometimes you do. So they've done it before and they know what it feels like. It can be, but I think it's just that sometimes that can just, at times it can get you down a little bit.
Yeah. And I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier around building those relationships and those trusted relationships, because if people trust you and you have a culture of, you don't have a culture of fear in the organization, then people will be more open and hopefully, those potential issues are resolved before they become issues.
That's exactly right. And I think it's really interesting that you have that lack of fear and the trust. But I picked up on something which was so well intended. So there was a team that are building out their metrics of how they're going to show that they're doing well. And they wanted to show that controls and risks matter to them. So when we issue a report, if it's really bad, it's red, and if it's great, it's green. It's the scale. And they put something into their oversight metrics, which was, we will not have any red audit reports. And it's so well-meaning, because what they're saying is we're going to take this so seriously. But for us, that can be a nightmare, because if people are frightened of getting a red report, they start hiding things from you. And if they hide things from you, we can't do our job. So I asked them not to put it in. And it's just little things like that. So it can be really well-intended, because actually management was saying, your function matters to us so much for putting it into our sort of oversight metrics. But actually for us, it's like, oh, please don't do that, because I've seen how that plays out. It doesn't land well. I think that's it.
Yeah. I also just wanted to touch on you saying that, the delivering of the feedback when it's not entirely positive can be quite, emotionally challenging. And I think that I actually think it's really important that people never lose that, because as soon as people are delivering not so positive messages and they're no longer caring about the recipient, I think that it just makes for a really unhappy relationship. So I think, pros and cons.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to sit back whenever you're delivering a message and think about, how is this going to impact this person? How is it going to impact their team? How is it going to impact their future strategy? And you have to be conscious of that, because something that might seem really small to me actually might be the result of one person's entire work. So it's so important that you have that deep understanding of what matters to them, not just what matters to us. So again, it does everything I'm going to say today probably goes back to understanding people. It's absolutely critical.
Right, thank you. Okay, let's take it all the way back to the beginning. When you were younger, what did you want to be? What did you want to be when you grew up?
So really young, I wanted to be an astronaut. So I was obsessed by space. I had a little telescope. I looked up at the sky all the time. I had this idea that I was going to go to Mars in, I think it was 2002 or 2003, because I'd read this little article that said that the Earth and Mars would be nice and close. And so by that point, I was going to be 22, and I thought I was clearly old enough to be an astronaut. And then I got a little bit older, so probably about 8, and I realised I was petrified of small spaces. I'm really claustrophobic. And I'm not kidding, that was the end of that dream. So I then decided I wanted to heal the world. I've always had this drive to look after people. That was always there. But then I decided I wanted to heal people, heal the sick. Had absolutely no interest in biological sciences. So there were signs that I might have been about to go down the wrong route, but I wildly ignored them. And so I decided I was going to be a doctor. And it's fascinating when you're young and you tell people you want to be a doctor, because the praise you get for even just suggesting that you want to be a medic is it's addictive. So everyone's delighted with that decision. So off I went on that trajectory. Really didn't question it at all. I did a little bit of work experience, but I anyway, so it was quite a naive approach, I would say, I took to that. Amazingly, I got in, and I got to my
study medicine.
Yeah, so I went to study medicine. I went to medical school in Southampton, and I was utterly miserable. It wasn't for me. I wasn't good at it. I don't have that kind of memory, to be honest. I mean, the volume of stuff you have to remember is amazing. I'm someone who's good at working things out. I am not good at remembering stuff, and I never have been, and I don't know why I thought I would create the skill when I went to university. But anyway, so in my 3rd year, I dropped out, and it was a huge decision, and I hadn't thought about doing anything else. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I didn't at that point. My parents were quite strict, and they were like, well, you're not coming home because you'll never leave again. So I now needed to get a job pretty quickly. So I'd done bar work the whole way through university, and sort of when I was in 6th form. So I was doing that to fund sort of being there, but I now needed to pay rent. So I ended up au pairing. I had the rest of that year I au paired, and I looked after some amazing children. And during that period, I really just had to assess what was I going to do. And my dad doesn't have a degree. My mum has a teaching qualification, and she always felt that she could sort of fall back on that. So when my dad was made redundant when I was born, mum went back to work as a teacher in it. And I think I had this very strong work ethic that I was brought up with. But my dad and I talked a lot, and he was quite insistent that I should consider going back to university. And at this point, I obviously felt like a massive failure, a dropout, just what was I going to do? And that sort of the accolades, as I said, that you get when you get to medical school, and you have, oh my goodness, you really are put on a pedestal. And quite right, they're amazing people. But I was suddenly just this dropout. So anyway, I applied to go back, and I went and did what I find fascinating, which takes you a little bit back to being an astronaut. So I went and did a physics degree, because that was what I always loved. I was fascinated by it, and I wasn't necessarily the best at it, but I loved it anyway. This time round, actually doing what I enjoy. It's fascinated, bit more grown up, worked incredibly hard. Still didn't know what I wanted to be. And so I remember going in my final year of uni, there was a careers fair, and on the left was the teachers. So on the left were a load of people that kind of looked really welcoming and friendly. And obviously my mum was a teacher, so very comfortable was door left. And on the right was Goldman Sachs. And there were all these men, sorry, I should say, but, early 20s, all in suits and ties. They all had these little filofaxes under their arms, and they were all talking about all these placements they'd done. And I was like, I haven't done anything. And I remember, it's vivid in my head. I looked to my right and I thought, they don't look like my tribe.
Yeah.
I looked to my left and I was like, okay, they look like my people. I'll go that way. So I went into the teach. So I went left and I went into the teaching one. So then I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be a teacher. And I wanted to be a mum. I knew one day I wanted to be a mum. And I'd never met any women that were professionals with children. It just wasn't my background. That's not. I knew a lot of teachers because of my mum. And I knew that could work. I knew that worked with childcare, and so that seemed sensible. Whereas again, this sort of door on the right, I was like, as if. So then I did a teaching placement, and I was very lucky. So in my final year, I did 6 months of teaching. It was like half a day a week at a local school. This is career number one. I don't know what we're up to now. And I was rubbish. So I loved explaining physics, but I couldn't stick to the syllabus. I found what they were having to learn for GCSE so boring. I just kept going off on a tangent and kept being marked down because I wasn't teaching them what they needed to know. I was teaching them what I thought was interesting. I wasn't bad with the ones that found it really difficult. And I was really good with the ones that were really able, but the ones in the middle, I was hopeless.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand why people didn't find physics as fascinating as I did. I was just rubbish. So that wasn't going to work out. And then, I'm now slightly panicking because we're now sort of up to about May time. And then I'm not kidding. I met a chap at a party and he worked for Ernst & Young. He worked for EY. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I work for EY. He said, basically, I do a bit of maths. I talk to lots of people all day and I get to find out about loads of really interesting businesses. And I was like, that sounds great. So I started picking his brains and he said, oh, there are graduate schemes. They'll fund you whilst you train. And I thought, oh, wow, this will defer the thinking. I'll do another thing, but I'll be paid for it, so that's okay. And that is how I fell into being an auditor. So I joined a graduate scheme, blagged my way in. I did not know what audits were. I didn't know accounting. I didn't have any contacts. I just didn't know what I was signing up for, but somehow the firm I went to work for took a complete chance on me. I'm so grateful to them because it was an off-the-wall choice to let me in. But it turned out I loved it. And I guess it wasn't expected. So it was not a straight route. It was not well planned. It was not well considered. But I have been very lucky to have ended up where I am. I've loved my career. Very fortuitous, but not what I thought I'd end up doing. Not at all.
When if we just circle back to when you you dropped out of the medicine path, I'm sure that many of the audience have had to go through something similar. So I'd be really or might be thinking that very thing, like I'm on the wrong course. What should I do? Yeah. So, would you have any tips to share for how you went about making that decision and then how you, I guess, recovered from the decision afterwards?
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. So I think for me, I knew much sooner than I acted. I knew almost straight away that I was in the wrong lecture theatre. I found it so hard to let down my family. It was the first time I'd ever not succeeded in something, apart from my sort of, one of my driving tests. But it was new to me, this idea of failure. And this sense of letting down my family was so intense that I delayed the decision for far too long. I honestly think I knew in that first week that I was on the wrong course, but I just couldn't let go of the dream. As I think when you apply for something as competitive as medicine is, you spend your entire sixth form building up your CV, effectively doing volunteering and trying to be you sign up for everything. And I think you can sort of lose your, why am I actually doing this? Because everyone is behind you. So that loss, when that's taken away, and it does start to define who you are. It's you're not Kate anymore. You're a medical student. You're a medic, and you have this whole other identity, and you have this whole group of people that you're now invited to join. And like medics will have their own hockey teams and orchestras, and like they have this whole world, and it's so supportive. It's a wonderful world, and ultimately, you know that you're going to help society. You know you're going to do something amazing for people. And to have that chance, and I was so conscious of the fact that I'd taken a place away from someone else who wanted to do it. I mean, that really bear on my shoulders that I was wasting this opportunity that I had been given, I found it so hard to drop out. So advice-wise, I think it is talk to people. Don't judge yourself. Talk to yourself as if you would someone else, because you wouldn't put anyone through that sense of guilt. You wouldn't encourage someone to stay in something that they clearly don't enjoy. And it doesn't matter how illogical it is, it's how you feel about it. So, who in their right mind goes from being a medic to being happy being an auditor? Well, I do, because actually I found something that I love, and that's okay. And so I think not judging yourself, your own opinions is so important. But I didn't reach out to people. That I felt so ashamed that I didn't talk about it with anybody. And I sort of tried to make jokes about, I'm just not very good. And I sort of used humor to deflect people. And then when I did drop out, my mental health really suffered because I think I lost that role. I lost that sense of who I was, like my purpose. I'd completely lost that. And I think in your early 20s, you are trying to work out where you fit in the world. And it's a really tricky time. And so I was really lost. And I was so lucky to have had that job as an au pair, because I think looking after other people's children was bigger than me. It was more important than anything I was going through. And I think that really helped me sort of get back to making more objective decisions. So I think for me, doing something that I loved, I think deep down you do know what makes you tick. You know what you feel good about. Everyone always talks about identifying their strengths, and that is really important. But I would go a stage further. You need to know what makes you happy. So when you use that strength that you have, does it make you sing? Does it make you happy? So, and it doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter if that's not obviously helpful to society. If it is good for you, you will be helping people. I've really struggled at times with this idea of, I'm in financial services. What does that mean for society? This idea of bankers being evil. But actually, on a day-to-day basis, what do? I support my team and their careers, and they have families, and they support. So I think it's trying to take the judgment out of the decisions you're making. There is no right and wrong. No such thing in a career. And not being afraid to face into those difficult decisions, because it is so hard. But the relief when you do it and you refind your path, whatever that looks like, you stop judging yourself and you just allow yourself to make the decisions that are right for you. I think if I could go back, that's definitely what I would do.
I read this really great book last year by an author called Marcus Buckingham, and I think it's called Love and Work. And he talks about strengths and weaknesses. And I think he uses some really good language, because often we, like you say, we do things and we might be good at them, but if we don't enjoy them, then are they really strengths? So he talks about strengths should be something that you're good at, but they strengthen you. So almost like you feel good doing them. But if you're good at something but you don't feel good doing it, then is it really a strength? And that's something I found really interesting.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I'll give you an example from me. In my career, I'm quite often told that I'm resilient, and I have a lot of grit. So resilience and grit is something that I've had in so many appraisals. So basically, when everything goes wrong, I'm quite good at just getting in there, getting my hands dirty, sorting stuff out, getting to a level where we can cope and then we carry on. And it is a skill of mine, and I know that. But when it's interesting, so I read something really similar and I challenged myself on it, and I thought, it doesn't make me happy. So I kept choosing jobs where I was being praised for being resilient, and actually resilience, because I thought it was one of my strengths, was something I was actively looking for. But it was making me miserable and exhausted. And it was really insightful for me. So I couldn't agree more. And it's a strength that I can use. So if I have to, I haven't lost that ability. I can be resilient, but I'm not actively choosing roles where I'm forced to be in that anymore. And that has made such a difference to my happiness. Really off the scale different. Because I've stopped seeing it as my strength. I think I overplayed it as well. I think now I'm much better at things like controlling my diary, making sure things are more structured, which doesn't come naturally to me. So I have to actively do that. But by doing that, I don't have to be as resilient. So since I've identified that about myself, it's changed a lot. It's definitely made my life better. Yeah.
So after that fortuitous conversation with the chap, you're now at EY. What's going on to make you feel like, this is it? Like, what are the signs that you've landed in the right place?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I didn't go straight to EY. EY wouldn't let me in, funnily enough, not straight away. So it was a smaller firm that let me in, and so I very much trained from the bottom. It was very old-fashioned. I started off photocopying, stapling, filing things. So I really did do like an apprentice scheme, and I worked my way up. And I think in a way, I'm so grateful for that, because I actually understand my craft from the inside out, which I think is a really good thing. But anyway, that's for another day.
Yeah.
But to start with, I was hopeless, Joe. I mean, I was the worst by a really long way. I can say that quite openly. So none of the managers ever wanted to book me because I was much slower. I just didn't really understand what was going on. Hadn't, again, researched it really properly. As I said, I'd had this conversation with the chap and blagged my way in, but I had a lot more to learn than my peers did, put it that way. And so I know I was getting further and further behind because people weren't booking me on their jobs. Anyway, there was one partner who needed someone, and he took a complete chance on me. And I was like, this is it. This is my shot. Oh, I put everything I had into that opportunity. I worked crazy hours, and I'm not advocating for this, but it's very me. Worked all weekend, and I was determined, and I, proud as punch, presented this file to him sort of a few months later. And looking back on it, it was an absolute disaster. It was, I can say this now, I mean, it was absolute rubbish, but he knew how much effort I put in, and he kind of saw my potential, is what I'm trying to say. I wasn't there, I wasn't polished, but he could see that I was worth the investment. And then he took me under his wing, and he put me on his jobs, and that happened to be in financial services. So the firm that I went to did every type of business, and he was this financial service partner, and that was how I ended up in this industry that I'm in. It was just chance. But the more that I learned, the higher up I got, and this has been consistent throughout my career, the better I've got. It's been sort of like an exponential curve, but my God, it didn't start well. But I had this determination to succeed. Like I wanted it. I had this absolute fire in my belly. I think I knew I was better than they were giving. I knew I could do it. I just knew I needed help. And I didn't know what the help looked like. But as it turned out, it was him. It was just someone giving me a chance. It's definitely changed the way in which I look at my team it's that looking for potential rather than always looking at what they've done before. And it's so important to give people those opportunities, because sometimes it doesn't work out and sometimes actually you misread it. But okay, so you've wasted a bit of effort. It doesn't matter. But when you do find someone that is just needs a bit of support to give them that bump up, I'll never be able to repay that person. But so grateful for it.
So what happened? So I'm guessing you then worked with him more and more and got more experience, and then what happened?
Well, then I got itchy feet, and then I wanted to work somewhere bigger. So as I said, this was quite a small firm, and this was a big mistake. So not the leaving and not the going somewhere bigger, but I went for a role which was out of my depth, and I'm quite good at interview. I'm quite good at performing, and that's not right at all. And I know that at an interview, but because of certain privileges in my life, I do perform well at interviews. So I again, blagged. So there's another word. I keep saying that, don't I? I got my way through by pretending to be something I wasn't. So I over-egged some of my sort of accolades and the types of clients I'd worked on. And I pretended to be a type of person that I wasn't. It was a real sort of old gentleman's club, this place that I'm into. And I did not fit in, but I really wanted to go somewhere prestigious. And the next 2 years were easily the worst 2 years of my career. I just couldn't be myself. I had to change the way I talked. I changed the way I dressed. I changed what I communicated about. I couldn't talk about anything at home. I mean, I didn't really work for any women, and the women that I did work for I just had nothing in common with them. All they ever talked about was football. And it was just strange sort of microaggressions, you know, like you go to a client meeting and maybe I'd have like a shoe with a little heel on and she would just march ahead to the extent that I couldn't keep up, and I would be running through London without any shoes on just to keep up with, and she knew. It was just a very strange working environment, but because I hadn't been me at interview, they hadn't hired the person they thought they had. So it was, you know, I take absolute accountability for it. But I couldn't quit, and it was the same thing as me dropping out of med school. I just had this, I'm not going to quit. I've got to protect my CV. I can't be seen to be failing. Couldn't cope with failure. And in the end, my now husband, that, you know, I was coming home so exhausted, so upset every evening. He's like, you just need to get out. Just get out. I was like, I can't do that. I couldn't possibly, you know, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and he was like, why not? Let's just go. And so we did. So we had a whole year off. So we dropped
brilliant.
out, the two of us. And we went travelling, and we spent what was going to be our house deposit. And it completely changed my life. And it was really interesting. And I came back, and I did go back into the same, believe it or not, I actually went back to the same firm because I hadn't burnt my bridges. It wasn't like I hadn't under-delivered. It was just I hated it. But I had a completely different attitude, and I just had this confidence that I'd learned, I think, from just growing up a bit about who I was. And I was like, I am going to be me, and I'm going to dress like me, and I'm going to talk like me, and I'm going to talk about stuff I'm interested in. And it turned everything around. And I was so happy. And that was probably the biggest turning point, I'd say. I've never done that since. So I think whenever I've interviewed since then, I have been utterly me, because at least they know what they're getting. And if they don't want me, that's absolutely fine. It's a two-way conversation. But I think that is another thing that I would urge people not to do, is just don't misrepresent yourself. Because if they don't want you to you don't want to be there. It's a very simple mantra, but in my experience, it massively paid off. But things just definitely ticked up from then. And then that was a big change for me.
Yeah. And I'm curious, so going back to the firm after the year out, was some of the people that you worked with like, wow, Kate, you're so different? Or did they pick up on the difference?
Yeah, they did. So a lot had moved on, and that was probably part of the reason for coming back.
Yeah.
But, no, they really did. I think I just had I had a very different perspective on things.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, they definitely did. In my career, I was sort of immediately promoted, and the results sort of spoke for themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, then that changed, and I had my first daughter, and again,
Yeah.
we're talking 10 years ago now, and that was very difficult. They just didn't know what to do with me as a mum who wanted to be part-time. It just didn't fit in their bucket of what was expected. I mean, we weren't married, and I remember when I told the partner that I was pregnant. Now I had to. It was one of those situations. So he called me in, one of the partners, because I kept being sick in the ladies' toilets.
Yeah,
I was horribly had morning sickness like no tomorrow, and I was only at sort of 8-9 weeks. Really didn't want to tell anyone. It wasn't time. And, and I had to. And so he basically called me in and he said, "Look, we have work hard, play hard culture, but we're just a bit concerned. We've heard rumours." And I had to tell him. Well, I felt like I had to tell him, and he literally looked down at my ring finger on my left hand and went, "Not you." And I said, "I'm sorry." And he said, "Well, we were expecting it from a colleague of mine. She's married, but you." I was like, "I'm terribly sorry I haven't met your expectations." And then he said, "Was it planned?" And I said, "Not that it's any of your business, but yes." So that was what I was walking into. Then I was subsequently taken off talent lists and told that my potential had gone down a grade because my focus should be elsewhere. So that was an interesting time. So that was sort of the beginning of the end of working there. And then I had a lot of well-meaning men telling me that childhood goes so quickly. I really should reconsider wanting to work. Did I not want to be a proper mum? And what staggers me is looking back. I'm only talking 10 years ago, and it's quite remarkable looking back on it. So that was the beginning of the end of working there. And then I moved again. So this is when I finally ended up at EY. And that was such a great move for me. I worked for some incredible people who nourished me, and being a working mum was not a problem in their eyes. And it just, again. So every stage of my career, I've been so fortunate to learn from and be supported by some brilliant people. But there's been a point at which I've known it's not quite worked, or it's not quite working for me anymore. And I think the older I get, the better I'm getting at realising when that point is, and making the difficult decision. I think I've always known it. I just haven't had the courage to act on it. And I think part of that is the privilege of the more senior you get, the easier that does become to be able to understand your value and your worth. It is really hard. I mean, certainly when we were sort of down to 1.5 incomes and had a small child, I wasn't in a position where I could just go, "Oh, I'm just leaving." I mean, there was absolutely no way. So I have to recognise the privilege I now have, that I actually have some savings at long last, and I can make more difficult decisions quicker. But I think it wasn't just that. I was definitely shying away historically.
All right, thank you. So now you're at Ernst & Young, and tell us about, how long you were there for and what you were doing in that role.
Yeah, sure. So I desperately wanted to work for sort of bigger and, I think in my head, more exciting clients than I had previously. And I think people quite often say that you leave places because of your boss, but I very much joined somewhere because of the person I was going to work for. And I hope you won't mind me saying his name. So his name is Jeet Singh, and he's still one of my most influential mentors, I'd say. And I'd seen him speak at a number of conferences on a sort of regulatory area that I find fascinating. And so when a headhunter rang me up and said, would you consider interviewing? I was like, oh my goodness, yeah. So, let me in type thing. And so for me, it was absolutely thrilling going to work for him. And then I sort of assumed that working at EY would open doors, etc. It actually was very different to what I was expecting. I think there were areas that were better that exceeded my expectations. So some of it was utterly thrilling. So suddenly I had access to all of this brain power. So if a client asked you a question, you just sort of popped down onto a different floor and there was someone who would be an expert in it. And had this global reach. You could talk to people in the US about stuff that was affecting your US clients. And I found that utterly thrilling. But I think one of the biggest changes for me was my line manager. I worked for lots of different partners, but she was the first person I'd worked for who was a woman that was part-time, that was a very proud mum. And she was utterly supported by EY in her life choices. And the way that she worked was so different to how I'd seen women work before. And I think historically I'd always seen women really just try and pretend to be like the men that they were working with. And certainly I had fallen into that trap of trying to be something I wasn't. I mean, I dressed completely differently. I became very, very androgynous, I stopped wearing heels and wore sort of trouser suits and started buying my shirts at TM Lewin, and it's a great look, but it just wasn't me, I wasn't me. And there was this woman who was feminine but powerful, and seeing the two work together, I was like, oh wow, this can work. And I think one of the first meetings we went to, and she said, I work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, not I'm sorry I don't work on a Thursday, which was the way that I went into every meeting, was always apologetic about what I didn't do, not acknowledging what I did. And that was a big game changer for me, because I had this, I think they say if you can see it, you can be it. And really changed things. And it was a big accelerator in terms of my confidence. It sort of felt like this, I felt free. And Jeet had a massive impact on me as well. So I'd watch him in meetings, and he had this ability to admit what he didn't know. And before then, I'd always had this sort of training almost to, just sort of blag it until you know it. And the clients need you to be confident. So just sort of find out after if you don't know, but don't let them know that you don't know things. There was just this strange inability to ever really tell the truth about your limitations. And I think that left me always feeling like a phony. And I did know a lot of stuff, but I think it just left me with this uncertainty. And there was this man who in a meeting would confidently say, oh no, that's not my area of expertise, but I'll find someone who does know. And again, that was groundbreaking to me, because I was like, wow, the client they know he's so good that he's able to say he can own what he doesn't know. He can own his own deficiencies or weaknesses or whatever you want to call them. And again, I was like, wow, that is freeing. That means I can really be me. So I think what I'm getting to is I actually saw authenticity for the first time in leadership. And it was a big thing. And I had these people that I really aspired to and wanted to achieve with. I felt more out of my depth than I've ever felt in my career. They pushed me to limits I didn't know I had. There was so much uncertainty, so much change. It was as petrifying as it was exhilarating. But it was a stretch I was ready for, and I'm probably looking back on it with happier memories than maybe if I was still in it I would have. But I relished that time, and it really was the moment, I think, in which I started appreciating my own worth. It also coincided with me falling pregnant for the second time, and the support that I had through pregnancy was just a different world. I was given coaches to support me. I mean, towards the end, Sarah, my then boss, she would actually come and meet me at Waterloo Station, where I got the train in. We'd get a taxi to a client, and then she'd bring me back in a taxi, and I would get the train home, just to make sure I was safe. I mean, it was extraordinary, just human care. And it was for a very short period. And I think, they had a long-term view of supporting me, and that was fantastic. And I was able to grow my own book of business. I became expert in areas that I found interesting. So they let me explore what I was interested in, and grow with it. And I felt very proud of the work that I did when I was there. I felt like I was genuinely helping my clients. But I also got to this problem of never having actually worked in a business that of the style that I was supporting. And I found increasingly I would give advice. I was an advisor, an auditor, but effectively you're giving advice. And I didn't have any concept of what it was actually like in the real world. And I found that sometimes I'd see my clients getting frustrated and say, well, yeah, that's really great from your ivory towers, but how do you expect us to implement this? How do you expect this to work in practice? So I knew I needed some time. We call it an industry. All that means is just actually at your clients. So I went off on maternity leave with a bit of I'm not sure. And it was whilst I was on maternity leave that my next role materialised, and Vanguard, who were one of my clients at the time, contacted me and asked if I would be interested in working for them. Really, really hard decision, because I was very happy where I was. Probably the first time I'd really made a leap because I was pulled rather than pushed. I decided to go for it and make a bit of a leap, and then I moved into the finance function. And that was the next step. That's what happened at EY.
I think what's really nice about those experiences you talked about was the role of role models. And I think it goes to show that somebody doesn't have to be giving you advice to give you permission to for them to be your mentor or role model, as it were. Your boss showed you an unapologetic way to be. Your other boss showed you how to be humble and honest about what you didn't know, and that was okay. And I think that is really good for people who are perhaps earlier in their career, who perhaps don't have formal mentors, to be aware of that. You can look to these people around you and learn from them without them being a formal mentor of yours.
I think that is such an interesting challenge that we have now with hybrid working, because I think I couldn't be a bigger fan of hybrid working and flexible working, and the ability to make your work life work for you. But what is interesting is a generation are coming up that don't have that day-to-day contact, don't get that chance to observe. And actually it is through observation that you learn so much about the type of leader you want to be someday, the type of interactions you want to have with people. And it's something I'm trying to work through as a leader at the moment, is how do I attract my team back into the office so that they get that opportunity, because it's so hard to explain to them when they're missing out on something that they don't know they're missing out on. And when you say, please do an hour of commuting just so you can watch someone, it doesn't sound that appealing, but I completely agree. It is by observation that you can pick up on so much of what can make you successful, as opposed to that formal mentoring. And I think the other side of that is that responsibility of role modeling when you are in a leadership role. Sometimes I don't think as you climb the ladder, you realize the impact that you can have on people in their careers. It would almost be too much if you really thought about it every day. But I am very conscious of that now, that it's things like, if you see, I was challenged on this by a book by Vinay Myers, about what if I say the wrong thing? And she says in that, you observe something as a leader, something bad's happening. She paints this picture. And what do you do in that situation? And I thought, well, I would take that person aside and I would have a private conversation with them. And she then says, did you have a private conversation? I was like, yes, I did. And she says, what has your team now seen? What your team has seen is you condone that behaviour and you've done nothing about it.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, but I can't possibly berate this person in front of everyone. And then she says, you don't have to berate that person, but you can say something that points out that that is not acceptable behaviour, but you don't have to do it in an aggressive way. And that really stuck with me, because effectively the point is, if you don't say anything, you are condoning it. And as a leader and in terms of role modelling, that it just really hammered home to me that people do watch what I do now. They do watch what I say.
Yeah.
And they do sometimes mirror it. And that, as I said, it can be a really petrifying thought when I actually think about it. But it's a responsibility that you have as a leader to set the right tone. Because people will see that as what they need to do to be successful, whether you mean to or not. It's something I don't think I considered when I was more junior, but I'm acutely aware of it now.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So now you're at Vanguard, in the finance team. Tell us about that, and then your transition into audit there.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire. It was a very, very new team. It was hugely under-resourced, and just had to throw myself in and get stuck in. And so again, massive learning curve. Culturally very, very different to where I'd come from. The biggest change for me was I didn't have the EY brand anymore. So when you work for a really big company and you march around and tell people what you think they should be doing, and you have this brand supporting you, people listen.
Yeah.
And I'd gone from being their advisor to being someone that they didn't listen to. I remember going into the FD's office really early doors going, oh, I think we're doing this incorrectly. We need to do X, Y, Z to fix it. And he literally sent me out of the office and he said, right, go away and think about what you're saying before you come back in.
Yeah.
And I just didn't understand what his problem was. I was like, I've just given you thousands of pounds of free advice. If I was still at EY, I'd have charged you for this. And I really couldn't fathom it. And then, so I had another go, and he, what he was after obviously was the why now? What does that actually mean? But it was the credibility point. I had lost that brand behind me, and he immediately said, oh, I think we better check this with EY. And I was like, I was EY a week ago, and I found that transition really tricky. So suddenly I had to create my own personal brand, and I hadn't really had to do that before. So that was a big learning for me, was how without that power of a brand behind you do you get power? So I didn't have positional power. I'd lost that as well. I kind of came in more junior than I probably should have done, unfortunately. So that was quite a struggle for me. And I didn't have a big team underneath me, which I was used to. I had this tiny little team. So all of the sort of the power things that I was used to having, I'd lost. The only way I could get that back was doing a really good job and being credible. So that was really what I focused on. And it worked. And, you know, I think I got a reputation for getting stuff done and doing it to a good quality and being trusted. I was never good at managing upwards. I still aren't. I wasn't good at sort of influencing and persuading upwards, because I think in my head it was just the right thing to do. So obviously you would just go and do it. And that was a very strong learning for me, that even if it is right, it doesn't mean everyone else understands it. And it doesn't mean it's at the top of their priority list, because actually they've got a lot of stuff going on that you don't know about. So there were a lot of humble learnings for me, I think. But I enjoyed it. I mean, Vanguard culturally is very, very strong, and what they do for their members is at the core of who they are. It's very like being at YBS, where I am now. So that really resonated. I was bought in from day one. I loved it. I joined because of the culture and the values. I'd seen that when they were a client, and I wanted to be in it, and it felt so rewarding. But I think because I was in finance, I was audited a lot by the internal audit team. And when a position became available there, they asked me if I would apply, which I did. And then that was quite scary because then they went external as well. So I, again, really naively thought if they'd asked me to apply, they must want me to do it. And then opened it up to all these external candidates. And so that was quite frightening, but then really nice when I was successful, because I thought, no, I've got this fair and square. And it kind of ratified things, I suppose, for me in a way. That was good. So then I joined the audit function. Slightly different. It was a global function rather than, so I sat in Europe, but I actually reported into the US. And I loved that. I thought that was fascinating. Loved learning about what was going on over there. It was a real drive that I needed, I think. And I had really happy time in the audit function. We changed a lot within our team about how we were working, and we grew quite significantly. And it was probably the first time I'd really taken a team and sort of built it and established it and gave them a vision, and that stuff was great. So yeah, that was probably my first sense of really being a senior leader, and it was addictive, and I wanted more and more. And I certainly am not an easy person to lead. I've learned that about myself. I think people tend to either love leading me or really find it quite challenging. And it's interesting that the different characters that works for, but I think it makes me, I now realise that about myself. And so now that I understand that when I'm making career decisions, I do make sure that that's going to be a good working relationship. It's very two-way. I love autonomy. I love being able to make my own decisions. So I find any sort of micromanagement really difficult. But also I like to feel valued, and I like to feel like I'm adding value. So I need a leader to explain why I need to do stuff. What is the purpose and how does it help people? So helpfulness is another of my values. And so I really struggle with people that are very task orientated rather than people. Because I will immediately say, "Oh, why? Who does this help? what's the big purpose?" And sometimes actually you've just got to get on with stuff, and I'm not great at accepting that, I think. But there are other leaders that love working with people like me because they can give me something and I'll just get on with it, and I don't need lots of support and I don't need any hand holding, and so it just depends. But it was certainly helpful to understand that about myself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to, be very self-aware and know and understand yourself and how you might impact other people and how that might impact your relationship with other people. And I think now that like you say, you can make decisions based on that knowledge, which is really helpful.
Well, it's funny actually, because I've even gone so far as, when I joined YBS, I created a deck that said, these are my strengths. This is the flip of those strengths. This is what they look like as weaknesses, because they tend to, every strength you have tends to have if I overplay it. And my values, and I shared that with the exec so that they could get to know me as quickly as possible. I needed to be, I felt like I wanted to be as effective as I could. And I explained to them what I look like when I'm stressed, what I look like when I actually, without them asking, and I think they probably thought that was a bit strange, but I think when you have that self-awareness, sharing it actually can break down a lot of the barriers that stop you from working effectively. And so that's something that I like to do with my own team when they join. I want to know, what are your values, what are your strengths, and I do think it can help just speed that along, because you find that out over time. But I find that's a really helpful tool when you join somewhere new.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So tell us about your transition from Vanguard to YBS.
So that really came out of the blue. I was just wrapping up a project at Vanguard and thinking about next steps. and I didn't have a structured career path in mind at that point. And I think it is quite often like this with when you're headhunted. It's a day of the week that you're just thinking about things a bit differently. Now, some people have such set career goals and they know exactly where they're headed, and hats off to them, because I've never been one of those people. I have always had opportunities that I've taken, and I feel proud of having taken these risks, because this was a risk, me coming here. I had a lot to give up, because Vanguard's a great place. I would counter and say I have not put myself forward for things, and I do regret that. I haven't backed myself. I've taken risks when they've been offered to me. I haven't taken risks in finding opportunities. When I look back on my career, that's a gap that I do regret, because if you don't put yourself in the running, of course you're not going to be successful. So I've always been frightened of failing, frightened of someone saying no. And so unless I'm absolutely convinced that I'm right for something, I don't put myself forward. And that is limiting. And I'd certainly counsel away from that. And I hope I don't do that again in the future. But this was an opportunity that, again, I was offered. Obviously, I had to interview. And the interview process was really challenging. And I loved it. I felt really put under pressure. I needed it. It really got my adrenaline going, and I really wanted to impress them. And I think my first interview, I actually backed out. After the first interview, I withdrew, because as I said, I just wasn't ready to leave Vanguard. I loved the place, and so I withdrew. And then they rung me back that evening and said, "Please come and meet the CFO. We think you'd really like him." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll meet the CFO." And I did really like him, and he was really quite inspiring. And then I met the CRO, and then I met the whole heap of them, and I think I had 5 interviews, but each one was very different, and each one challenged me in a different way. And then, of course, by the end of it, I desperately wanted to come here. And then I was a bit cross, because I was like, well, I didn't really care a week ago, and it all happened really quickly. So I think on the Friday was when they had rung me up, the recruiter had rung. By the Monday, I'd had my first interview, and by the Friday, I had an offer. So
wow.
It was very quick, and my head wasn't really there. And it was a change of industry. So it was going from asset management into banking. And it was a move up to Leeds from London. So literally miles away. So it was a big decision. But they had been looking for some time, so they needed a quick decision, and so I went for it. So it was a big step up, because I remember they had this set of criteria of, I think there were 4 things on the list, and I literally hit one of them, I think. But they saw something in me. They went for the sort of talent over expertise, I suppose. They went down that route. They were looking for someone that was going to challenge them. They were looking for someone who would think of things a bit differently. And I've certainly done that. So again, it's been a big stretch, but I felt very supported. What's lovely here is people have so much time for you, to educate you, to teach you. They want you to be successful. And I felt that from day one. And that is really rewarding. So I'm growing again, I'm learning again. This is a thing in my career that you've probably picked up on. I like being stretched. I don't as soon as I get to a point of complacency, that's when I know I need to go and do something else. Because I don't work well when I feel comfortable. I just need that a bit. There's a limit, I know, in which you're so stressed that you can't work effectively. But when I'm near that sort of comfortable level, I just start doing less and less. And I know that about myself, and that doesn't make me feel good about myself. Being comfortable is not actually where I like to be. I like to be a little bit out of my depth. It's a bit like I like to be in the deep end, but I like the water to be just about there. So I'm sort of just bobbing up and down all day, but not there. But so but it's definitely given me that. So first time as an executive, First time as a chief of anything. And that's thrilling. I mean, it really is. It's, again, quite hard for me to get my head round that I'm one of 7 sitting on the executive, looking after all these people's money and all these people's careers. And I take that very seriously.
Yeah.
I take the stewardship element of it very seriously. It's such an honour to be given this opportunity. It's rewarding and it's thrilling, and at times it's quite frightening, but it is brilliant. And I don't regret taking that leap.
Yeah.
And it's not to say it's easy, and it's not to say I've got heaps more to learn. But learning in an environment where you're supported is a joy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to circle back to a couple of things that you mentioned. One of them actually really reminded me of a podcast I was listening to this morning. It was the Working It podcast by the FT, and they were talking about the difference between Gen X and millennials, and I think often often that I guess the perception is that millennials are, feel that they should be entitled to things. But actually, the host made a really great point. She said, the great thing about millennials is they're not afraid to go and ask for things. They're not afraid to say to their boss, I really love what I'm doing now, but by, in this time next year, I want to be here, or in 2, 3, 5 years time, I want to be here. And she compared that to her own experiences of, doing a great job and expecting to be noticed and tapped on the shoulder, that whole, we think you're ready now. And it really reminded me of what you were saying, because, I think that, you do have to kind of own it, and you do have to, have the courage to have those conversations, and they will help accelerate you in your career. And hopefully that's something that the millennials are paving the way for, Gen Z, but also the rest of us who are still in the workplace. Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting point, because when those millennials all started working for me and they started making themselves clear exactly that, in terms of, I expect to be here in 2 years. And I find that that's really shocked to start with, and I've obviously got used to it now. The other side of it, which probably doesn't sound positive, but I think we'll try and explain why it is. There are times when their expectations are so much higher than their capability, or they're trying to run at a much faster rate than they're ready for. But actually, even having that conversation when it's not that positive means that they know where they stand, and it forces you as a leader into feedback discussions that you probably weren't actually going to have. So they then understand, and you can actually set pathways for them, or they can make an informed decision to say, it's not going to happen for me here, I'm going to go somewhere else. And it probably does lead to higher levels of attrition, and I think people probably are moving quicker than they used to. But I actually think there's a real positive in that. Having those open conversations where you're both very clear about how fast you think someone can move through the organisation, I think is a great thing. And sometimes it is just brilliant to hear that they're actually owning things, and they have got aspirations, and when you then think, okay, how am I going to help them get there? That's brilliant. That's a brilliant feeling. Because otherwise you can fall into that trap of, they're delivering for me, great, let's keep this going. But actually where they're trying to get to is somewhere else. And so I think it's a huge positive, even if it does lead to some difficult conversations along the way. And
the other thing you mentioned is that your organisation have hired for potential, and the fact that you offer many different credentials than perhaps was on the original kind of list. And I think that should give confidence to people who might look at a job description and feel that, I couldn't possibly apply for that role because I haven't got XYZ. But actually, as we both know, often the job description is looking for a unicorn, and the reality is we won't find the unicorn. So go for it, and you might just be the one.
I'll tell you the way of not doing it. So when I interviewed for Vanguard, there was a list of 9 things that they wanted. And I remember there was one that I'd never done before. And it was VAT returns. And actually I had done them before, but I hadn't done them for years and I didn't really like doing them. And I think one of the first things I said at interviews, I don't do VAT returns. I look back at it now and I think, what was I doing? What was I doing? But I just felt like I had to make that clear because I didn't want to come with false pretenses and I didn't want them to think they were getting something they weren't. And it was so utterly ridiculous. It still makes me chuckle, but I think you're so right. I think we as a team are looking at the way in which we recruit because we've moved to a sort of a talent type strengths recruitment way, but even in the wording that we can use we can put people off inadvertently. There's things I hadn't considered, like, you know, if you say something like we want them to hit the ground running, well, you're not going to get anyone that hasn't ticked all the boxes if you put something like that in, and that's never actually what we're looking for and what we really need. There's always time for growth and support. And I think it is interesting to try and, when you're looking at job specs, and really take yourself out and go, well, who am I going to get if I actually put this out there? And more importantly, who is not going to apply? But I think as leaders, we really do shoot ourselves in the foot there, because we tell people to take a leap, but then we make it absolutely clear why we're not going to hire them. And it's so rare that even when somebody hits all those boxes that you think you want, they're actually exactly what you wanted. And most of the time, it's the people that don't have all the criteria that end up being your superstars. So I think it goes both ways. It's certainly don't not put yourself in the running because you don't think you've ticked every box. But also I think as people doing the recruiting, just to really think about who are you putting off, and therefore are you just going to end up with a group of people that all look and sound like each other? Because that's the big risk that you run, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Kate, when we look back at your career journey, tell us what the biggest high is.
It's funny. I think I'd probably have to split it into 2. So the highs for me are those moments when you hear from someone who used to work for you and they just get in touch out of the blue and let you know how they're getting on, and they take the trouble just to let you know maybe that you had an impact on them, or just even the fact they stay in touch with you. And when you see them achieving without you, I guess it's a bit like parenting, but oh God, there is nothing like that feeling of when you see them fly. And to think you had a part in that is my greatest joy. Or when honestly, I can think of meetings where I've tried to support people. I remember there was one guy that worked for me, and he did find client meetings really tricky. He was a technical expert, but he wasn't a natural showman, salesperson. He found that side of it really quite difficult. And I'd had to give him some pretty tough feedback about his delivery and how he came across, and we'd worked on it for a long period. And then he came in 3 years later, after we'd stopped working together, to advise me on something. And came into Vanguard, and there he was flying, and he was brilliant. And honestly, I wanted to give him a round of applause. It was so satisfying. So I think there's definitely an element of seeing people that you've developed and their careers taking off. It's just lovely. And it doesn't have to be their careers. Sometimes it's you get a wedding invite, or I don't know, you find out they've had their first child, or it's just, I don't know, that to me is wonderful. And then I think on a very personal sort of, work note, I had when I was at EY, I did a piece of work that I put myself out there for, and I didn't know much about this area, and it was really scary from start to finish. but the more that I learned, the more confident I became. And I put myself in this area where I wasn't confident, but I ended up writing guidance that supported our industry. And I kept putting myself out there. And it culminated in me writing this big piece of guidance that was then sent out to sort of all the asset and wealth managers in the UK. And we then put on a seminar, and it was oversubscribed by I don't know how many. And hundreds of people came to hear me speak about this area. And at the time, I was about 8 months pregnant. It was just before I went off maternity leave. And I literally couldn't fit behind the podium. I remember sitting on this big table, one of those white cloths. For me, it was petrifying. I'd never done this before. And so I waddled my way over. I could barely breathe because, when your lungs get all crushed because your baby's in there. So I was trying really hard to catch my breath. And then I try and stand behind this podium, and there is not enough room for me in my bump. And so I waddled my way and sat back down, and they had to get me a microphone. And it was like a comedy, and people were giggling in the audience, and that was fine because it was quite funny. But then I could see them learning, and I could see me teaching them, and I could see pennies dropping for them. And it was this piece of guidance that was really needed in the industry. And I didn't write it in isolation. I had so much support from lots of different people. But being part of that it just felt so good. And I felt so proud. And years after, people were still using that guidance, and we ended up sort of campaigning in Brussels for changes to regulation, really off the back of that. And then years later, regulations changed, and we'd been part of that. We'd been part of that sort of lobbying, and it wasn't me on my own. It was me being part of something much bigger. But oh God, that build up, having worked at it for so long, really believing in what we were doing, and then helping other people with that delivery. That felt, I will always, I think, go back to that example. It just felt
massive impact.
Really good. Yeah. So I think, it's both. It's the little things. Sometimes just when you see little changes in people that are going to be beneficial, that you help them see about themselves, and then it's those massive things where it felt like an out-of-body experience. I remember just sitting there going, is this really happening? And people really here to listen to me, but it was amazing.
What about the biggest challenge or failure or limiting belief that you had to overcome when you look back on the career journey?
Oh, there's a lot of steps I've taken, not through malintent, but there's times when I can give you a really recent one with a colleague of mine who's pregnant, and I always look forward. I always think about, what are we going to do now? What's next? What's next? And in doing so, I'd managed to make her feel so excluded that she was feeling like, my God, do they even want me to come back after maternity leave? And it was a huge misstep, and I caused her pain, and there was a positive from it in that she felt she could come to me with that. And that was, I felt really humbled that she felt she could talk about that with me. But I that was terrible. I had not acted out of malintent, but I had caused her pain, and I reflected and I thought, no, that I will learn from, and that I have learned from. But there are moments like that in leadership where you don't think you're doing the wrong thing, but actually you are causing other people harm inadvertently. And what's critical in those situations is that you've created an environment. You have to create that environment eons before that conversation of trust. That's why, as a leader, you have to create that so that you can have that open conversation. And it was such a privilege that she could share that with me. So that was a recent one, but it still obviously sits with me to just feel bad about it. I think in terms of limiting beliefs, I do suffer with imposter syndrome quite badly, and there's lots written of it, and lots of people have different ways that they experience it. But for me, it's the feeling of I haven't earned my place, I sit there feeling like I've got two pigtails and I'm in a pinafore dress, and I'm going to get found out. They're going to realise I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And I've worked really hard to quieten that voice.
Mm.
I've had executive coaching on it. Very, very fortunate to be, that was funded through work. I've read lots of books. I listened to lots of different things on it, and it's really helped. And I've got to a position where I can manage it.
Yeah.
I can turn that nasty voice down. And when I feel the adrenaline rising and I think, oh, I can feel it, I've been able to turn that into me telling myself that means there's lots of oxygen going to my brain, my blood's going through very quickly. That's going to help me. That's going to help me think logically, and I'm going to be all right. I've earned my place here. But I do still sort of have to go through that. But that has historically led to me not going forward for things, not putting myself in the ring when I could have, not sticking up for myself. It has certainly led to me being significantly underpaid compared to my peers. Because I haven't spoken up, because I haven't challenged. But fundamentally, it was because I didn't believe I was worth what they all were, even though I could objectively see that I was delivering. I was, and I am, but it compounds. So that was very limiting. So I think for me, starting to value myself, understand my worth, has been a big, big change in how I feel about, I suppose, myself, and that has led to my career accelerating. The hard one.
Yeah. So I think imposter syndrome is quite common and widespread. So of all of the I guess the learning you did around that topic, for anyone listening or watching who's suffering right now, what would be your top tip for them?
I think it's to try and build up, well, this is what worked for me. It's trying to build up a body of evidence that argues with that voice. And the time to do that is not when you're in the moment. It's in the quiet times when you have time to self-reflect. And for me, it was as if I was going into a court of law, and on one side I had my nasty voice, and I tried to sort of separate him as a separate being, and on the other side I wanted there to be objective truth. And so when I knew when that voice was rearing its ugly head, I started noting what were the situations when that was happening, so I could identify them and almost be prepared for them. But what was it telling me, and what evidence did I have to back that up? Or what evidence did I have to counter it? And I am an auditor, so obviously evidence makes me happy. But that body of evidence that I started to bring up became my support network. And over time, I was able to imagine it sitting in a bottle, like on a shelf. I could picture it as I don't know if you've read the BFG by Roald Dahl, but like where he puts all his happy dreams in a jar, and they look at him, and then this is what my body of evidence was. So I did physically write them down, and I found that helpful in it going in my brain. But I don't really have a jar, but that's what I picture, and I have that, and I can feel it within me. I now know when it's coming, and then I try and steady myself. I center it. And I can sort of feel this body of evidence coming and countering that voice, and I let that happen, and then I continue. So it's taken a long time, but that is what I go back to. But I think in terms of advice, it's absolutely understanding what is it that it's telling you, and how could you argue against that, and what do you have objectively to help you understand that. And when you start doing it, it's quite amazing how much evidence there actually is. But so I think that's where I'd go. But there is a wealth of information out there. But it all I can really say is it is worth trying. It's not something that it might be something that you will have to manage for your whole life, but it isn't something that has to limit you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kate. That's really helpful. Okay, so for somebody thinking, I'm quite liking the sound of audit. I feel like I might like to pursue a career in audit. Can you tell us about the, I guess, either essential or helpful education or training someone might need to be thinking about doing?
Well, the really great news, which is another myth I'd like to dispel, is that there are millions of routes in. So
Yeah, great.
if I think about the people on my team, you have what's your classic audit route, which is external audit, as it's called, and you would become a member of either the Chartered or Certified Institute of Accountants. And they tend to be graduate schemes, so you can do a degree in literally anything. I think normally you need a sort of high to second degree, but not always. So that is one route in. So you follow a graduate scheme. You can also come in as a school leaver. So with decent A levels, but not defined which they are. And you can do a 5-year program where you will be, I should say, you're sponsored the whole way through. You're being paid whilst you do this. So you're being paid to study and to work. So it's on the job training, and that's 5 years. And at the end of that, you become a chartered accountant. So you're a professional. And it's exactly the same qualification as if you'd been a graduate. So there's a lot of entries which I'm very supportive of through apprenticeship schemes, which don't require all of the funding that you would need to do a degree first.
Yeah.
In terms of that's to become an accountant, and then normally through that you would do external audit, and then you would transfer into internal audit. The other routes that you can do is I have someone in my team who worked as a branch manager. And when she got to an age not dissimilar to mine, she decided she wanted a whole new career. And she's now going through an apprentice scheme with the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. And we're supporting her with on-the-job training. And she will get a qualification very soon that is effectively her ticket into following the same study that a graduate would into internal audit. So there's no time limit. There's no prior qualifications that you have to do. We can in our place, and lots of other places offer this through the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, support any path in effectively.
That's
so
great.
There isn't a set degree. There isn't a set of A levels or qualifications. Whichever path you take in, you can get there, and that makes me feel really proud as a profession. Because it's properly open. There are definitely skills that are helpful. I would say one of the main ones I draw is I spent 7 years doing bar work when I was much, much younger. And honestly, that ability to be able to communicate effectively with people, that's an absolute critical skill that I have. So there are so many transferable skills from whichever walk of life you've come up through. So I have found when we put adverts out for jobs, a lot of people don't put themselves forward because they think, I haven't got a degree in maths, for example. Or, I haven't got external audit experience, therefore I can't apply. And it just isn't the case. So we are looking for more and more people internally to rotate into our division. As for us, it's a huge win. We get people with a really deep understanding of the business coming in to support us. So lots of different routes in, but it's probably the skill sets that you want to be comfortable with. So great people skills, great analytical skills, being able to form good judgments, being curious. These are the types of things that we really look for, much more so than a sort of list of qualifications that they would need.
And I remember you talking earlier about half of the role is building that relationship and trust with the person you're auditing. So those relationship skills, as well as the ability to have candid conversations when needed, that's going to be really important as well.
It is. I mean, I think that, as I said before, is probably the more challenging aspect, but it is also one of the most rewarding. Because through those deep relationships, it's a really happy flywheel that the more that you invest in a relationship, the better your work becomes.
Yeah.
That's quite nice. So when you do take the time to go for lunch with someone, or it's actually beneficial to you as well as really it makes you happy. So it's quite a virtuous circle, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely relationship building is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And I would say if you don't like people, it's probably not the job for you.
Okay, thank you. So what does the future hold for audit as a profession?
That's a really interesting question. So I think we're very conscious of the fact that there are things that we used to do which you can now automate. And I think for me, it's not about replacing people. It's how do you use effective automation and data analysis to allow you to be better? So to focus on areas where if you can get a whole body of data that tells you where the risks are, then you can point your attention and then the people in a different way, in a more strategic way, in a more effective way. So things like automation, AI, data, so not dissimilar to other industries, but it's not ever going to replace a human, but it's going to make us an awful lot better. I think the direction of travel is definitely business partnering more than issuing reports, going in, ticking, bashing, and off we go. I think we now really understand the benefit of being there as people are building, as people are changing within the business. So historically, you might have said that audit would come in months after something had happened, point at it and say, oh, that wasn't very good. And now what we're trying to do is partner so that we really understand the risks in an agile way. So a lot of our work it has to mirror the direction of travel of the business. Because if we're not growing in the same way, if we're not auditing the business in the way that they work, then we're not effective. So I think the direction of travel, definitely towards business partnering and being more agile, being more relevant, more credible, more expertise, and using data in a clever way, in an informed way, to get more value from your work. I think they're probably the big things.
Thank you. If someone wants to find out more about audit as a profession, you mentioned the Institute of Auditors. Are there any other resources that you would point someone to go and have a look at?
I think that it's the Chartered IIA. So I think anyone that Googles that will get that's a global network as well as there's a sort of UK faction. That will give them such a good overview in terms of what we do, what we're about, as in terms of the profession. I think within any big business there will be an internal audit function. So for people that are already working for businesses, it is literally just go and sit with them, go and talk to them. Because whenever anyone comes to talk to us, we're delighted. It makes us feel special. So I think, any contacts that they have, but really any accountants, any of the professional accounting firms also will understand and be able to explain what it is. But I think the best bet is just to get that overview, probably from the CIIA on a website, just to get a big picture view of what it is that we do. Because I appreciate not everyone has contacts that are professionals or work with accountants. I certainly didn't. That's where I'd go as a first step.
Great, thank you. All right, Kate, as we move towards wrapping up, what do you know now that you wished you'd known when you were just starting out on your career journey?
This is going to sound strange, but probably how much fun I would have along the way. I think I always knew that I would have to work, and I always wanted to work. I had a strong work ethic, but I never realised how much I would get from it. It would have given me comfort, because I think I was quite frightened when I went into the workplace. I certainly felt like a phony, and oh my God, my imposter syndrome was through the roof when I first started. I mean, I remember my first interview, I could barely even walk into the building. There were these barriers, automatic barriers that would go through every day. I'd never seen an automatic barrier like that before. I remember my sister was with me and she said, Kate, it's just a building. So I think part of it is how amazing and fulfilling it would be. I wish I could go back to then and just say, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
I wish I'd understand my worth throughout. I
Yeah.
think that's a theme that I would draw out. I wish I had understood that better and really appreciated my own talent, because I didn't. I really didn't, and it has definitely stifled me at times. And I've not gone for opportunities that I should have, and I've probably held myself back at times. And I've put up with things that I shouldn't have put up with. So I definitely wish I'd been more courageous and known that I was worth more than they were willing to give me.
Yeah.
But I think it'd just be so nice for that person 20 years ago to have known that I would really enjoy it. It wasn't a means to an end. And so to look forward to it rather than worrying about it. Because it has. I mean, it's just, I've loved my career to date, and it's I've got another, I'm saying with a grin on my face, I've got another 20 years to go. And I honestly can't wait to see where I end up. I have no idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do next. I really don't. I still don't have a defined career plan, but I feel now that where I go, I will add value, and I will enjoy it. And that's a very comforting thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Now, Kate, I really love a quote. Do you have any favourite quotes or phrases or mantras that you live by?
I'm going to say mantras because I am the worst at quoting anything. I always get my words in a muddle, and those people that sing song lyrics really badly. I'm that person, so I'm not going to give you a quote. But I can't even remember what the name of the man is. It's something theorem, but anyway, it's effectively, and I do like this. Part of it is be kind. That I just hold absolutely dear to myself, and if people really could live that way, just imagine what the world would look like. That's a very simplistic but very powerful. The other, which is more audit related, is don't assume that people have sort of tried to make things bad. It's something like, it's normally 90% incompetence and 10% people trying to pull one over on you. And I think people quite often climb up that ladder of inference and assume the worst. So I do quite like that. Most of the time, people don't turn up to work to do a bad job. It's just things go wrong, and sometimes people make bad decisions. And I suppose really it's trusting intentions. But I think we get that wrong sometimes. I think we look at things that go wrong and we just assume that people have done it on purpose. And generally speaking, nobody turns up to try and make people's lives worse. No, people don't turn up to try and get stuff wrong. It just happens. So something along the lines of trusting intentions and not judging. Just trying not to be as judgmental as people can about why things happen. That's very important in audit. So unfortunately, we do spend our lives looking at all the things that can go wrong. So something along that line.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really valuable, and I know that the audience are going to get so much out of it, just like I have. Is there anything you would like to leave the audience with? Words of wisdom or encouragement or anything else?
I don't know if I'm very wise. I would I guess it's definitely believe in your own value. Don't be willing to put up with things that you know are not right. Don't dim your own light. I think that's really important. But believe in yourself and go for it, and enjoy it. Really enjoy it, because if you're not enjoying it, there are other options. You can always change your path. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing has to be, and don't be frightened if you don't know where you want your career to take you. I feel like young people now are put under so much pressure. I mean, how often do we ask children what do they want to be when they grow up? I mean, the answer should be happy. Not, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a vet, I want to be a whatever. It's just, and I think we just need to, I hope our generation, if we could just allow people to grow, allow people to find their own path. I think that would make a big difference, because I didn't know where I was headed, and I have enjoyed the journey, and I know other people can too.
Yeah.
So I hope that just alleviates some of the fear, because I really feel for people that just don't quite know where they want to be, because sometimes I think society, we don't make room for those people, and
Yeah.
we need to. So yeah, go explore and work it out, and don't put too much pressure on yourself, I think.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Kate. This has been brilliant.
Absolute pleasure, Jo. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining Kate and I on the show today. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you gained any value, please help us out by subscribing to the show and sharing it with your friends. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please get in touch. We really love hearing from you. And so until next time, remember, you're worth it.